Commander Zara Kethval stood on the observation deck of the Nexus station, her silver skin gleaming under the artificial lights as she watched another human transport dock. Her elongated fingers gripped the railing with barely contained disgust. 3 years she had been stationed here, 3 years of watching these primitive mammals stumble through the galaxy like children with plasma weapons. The Velter had ruled this sector for over 2 millennia. They were elegant, refined, intellectually superior in every measurable way. Their society had eliminated war, poverty, and suffering through careful genetic manipulation and social engineering. They were perfect beings living in a perfect civilization. And then the humans arrived. Zara's communication device chimed. "Commander, the human delegation has requested a meeting regarding the mining rights to Kepler 442b. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "Schedule it for tomorrow. I need time to prepare mentally for their enthusiasm." The humans were everything the Velter were not. Chaotic, emotional, unpredictable. They solved problems through trial and error rather than careful calculation. They formed attachments to other species without conducting proper psychological compatibility assessments. Worst of all, they seemed to thrive in situations that should have destroyed them. Zara had seen the reports from the Outer Rim territories. Human colonies establishing themselves on worlds that seasoned explorers deemed uninhabitable. Human traders negotiating deals that somehow benefited all parties involved, despite having no formal training in xenopsychology. Human peacekeepers resolving conflicts that had lasted for centuries through methods that made no logical sense. It was maddening. The next morning arrived too quickly. Zara entered the conference room wearing her most formal military dress, every piece of insignia perfectly aligned. She had prepared a detailed presentation on why humans lacked the technological sophistication and environmental knowledge necessary for mining operations on Kepler 442b. The human delegation consisted of 3 individuals. The leader was a woman named Sarah Chen, her dark hair pulled back in a simple style that somehow managed to look both professional and approachable. She wore a basic blue uniform with minimal decorations, and when she smiled, Zara noticed that her teeth were slightly imperfect. "Commander Kethval, thank you for meeting with us," Sarah said, extending her hand in the primitive human greeting gesture. Zara stared at the offered hand for a moment before reluctantly making contact. Human skin was warm and slightly rough, so different from the smooth coolness of Velter flesh. "Please have a seat," Zara said, gesturing to the chairs around the conference table. "I have prepared a comprehensive analysis of why your species is unsuited for the proposed mining operation." Sarah's smile never wavered. "We'd love to hear your concerns, but first, would you mind if we showed you something?" Without waiting for permission, one of the other humans activated a holographic projector. The image that appeared was Kepler 442b, but not as Zara had ever seen it. Instead of the barren, toxic wasteland described in the Velter surveys, this was a world transformed. Green plants covered vast areas of the surface. Crystalline structures that looked like a hybrid of architecture and organic growth reached toward the sky. Clean water flowed in rivers and collected in lakes that sparkled with an inner light. "This is our proposal," Sarah explained. "Not just mining but terraforming, not just extraction but creation." Zara felt her composure slip. "Impossible. The atmospheric composition is 73% nitrogen, 18% oxygen, and 9% trace gases, mostly carbon dioxide and methane. The soil contains heavy metal concentrations that would poison any known plant life. The average surface temperature is -40 degrees Celsius. "That's exactly why it's perfect," Sarah replied, her eyes bright with excitement. "Every challenge you just mentioned is an opportunity. We've developed new bacterial cultures that can process heavy metals and convert them into useful minerals. Our cold-resistant plant varieties don't just survive in low temperatures, they actually perform better. And that atmospheric mix, with a few adjustments, it becomes ideal for the specific ecosystem we want to establish." One of the other humans, a bearded man named Dr. James Rodriguez, leaned forward. "Commander, what if I told you that this project could produce not just rare earth minerals, but also a self-sustaining food production system that could support 1 million colonists within 50 years. Zara's training kicked in. "Your proposal lacks proper risk assessment protocols. You have no contingency plans for ecosystem collapse. Your timeline is unrealistic given the technological limitations of your species. You're absolutely right, Sarah agreed, catching Zara completely off guard. Our plan has huge risks. It might fail catastrophically. We could lose everything we invest in it. Then why would you even consider it? Sarah was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that Zara had never heard from a human before. Because if we don't try, we'll never know what's possible. Because someone has to be willing to take the first step into the unknown. Because sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risks at all. The third human, a young woman named Lisa Park, pulled up another hologram. This one showed children playing in fields of alien flowers, families gathering around tables laden with food, elderly people sitting on porches watching binary sunsets. This isn't just about mining, Lisa said softly. It's about giving life a chance in a place where no life existed before. It's about proving that beauty can grow in the harshest conditions if you're willing to nurture it. Zara found herself staring at the images. In her 300 years of life, she had never seen anything like the hope that radiated from these projections. Velter children were educated in sterile, perfectly climate-controlled environments. Velter families were created through genetic matching algorithms. Velter elders lived in medical facilities where their remaining years were carefully optimized for comfort and efficiency. Your emotional attachment to this project compromises your judgment, Zara said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. Maybe, Sarah acknowledged, but our emotional attachment is also what makes us willing to work 18-hour days for months to solve problems that pure logic says are impossible. It's what makes us get back up every time we fail and try again with a better approach. Dr. Rodriguez activated another display, this one showing detailed technical specifications. Commander, I know you think we're primitive, and in many ways you're right. Our computers are slower than yours. Our ships are less elegant. Our cities are messier and less efficiently organized. Zara nodded, finally some acknowledgement of reality. But we have something your species lost somewhere along the path to perfection, he continued. We have desperation, we have hunger, we have the absolute certainty that if we don't adapt and overcome, we'll die. That's not a strength, Zara protested. That's a fundamental flaw in your evolutionary development. Is it? Sarah asked. Commander, when was the last time your species discovered something that surprised you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Zara realized with uncomfortable clarity that she couldn't remember. Velter science advanced through careful, methodical research that built upon centuries of accumulated knowledge. They rarely encountered genuine surprises because they rarely ventured into truly unknown territory. When was the last time one of your people did something that seemed impossible but worked anyway? Sarah pressed. When was the last time someone in your civilization looked at a problem that had no solution and decided to invent one? Zara felt something strange happening in her chest, a tightness that she couldn't identify. Our society has eliminated the need for such chaotic approaches to problem solving. And what has that cost you? The question was asked so gently that it took Zara a moment to realize it was the most devastating thing anyone had ever said to her. What had it cost them? When had the Velter stopped dreaming? When had they stopped reaching for things that might be just beyond their grasp? Lisa activated one more projection, and this one made Zara's breath catch in her throat. It was a Velter child, but not like any she had ever seen. This child was laughing, running through one of those impossible flower fields, chasing something that looked like a cross between a butterfly and a tiny dragon. We don't just want to terraform Kepler 442b for humans, Lisa explained. We want to create a place where all species can discover what they're truly capable of when they're not limited by what they think is possible. The room fell silent. Zara stared at the image of the Velter child, and for the first time in her adult life, she felt something that might have been longing. Your proposal is reckless, she said finally. Yes, Sarah agreed. It will probably fail. Probably. It violates every principle of safe, logical development that my species has followed for generations. Absolutely. Zara closed her eyes. When she opened them, she was looking directly at Sarah Chen, and she realized that something fundamental had shifted in how she saw this human woman. The primitive features she had initially dismissed now seemed to radiate with intelligence and determination. The imperfect teeth were part of a smile that could apparently convince trained military officers to abandon their deepest convictions. "I will need to review your technical specifications in detail," Zara heard herself saying. "I will need assurances about environmental protection protocols. I will need guarantees about oversight and monitoring." Sarah's smile widened. "Of course, we wouldn't expect anything less. And I will need to understand how you plan to achieve these impossible things you're promising." "We'll show you everything," Dr. Rodriguez promised. "Every calculation, every experiment, every failure that led us to the successes." "The failure reports might be more important than the success reports," Zara admitted. "We completely agree," Lisa said. "We've learned more from our mistakes than from our victories." As the meeting concluded and the humans gathered their materials, Sarah approached Zara privately. "Commander, I know this is difficult for you. We're asking you to trust people you've been trained to see as inferior." Zara considered this. "It's not just that. You're asking me to believe in possibilities that my entire education tells me don't exist." "I understand, but I hope you'll give us a chance to show you that sometimes education can be a limitation instead of an asset." After the humans left, Zara remained in the conference room for a long time, staring at the space where the holograms had been. She tried to summon her usual disgust at human arrogance and naivety, but all she could think about was that child running through the flowers. That night, she did something she had never done before. She accessed the human cultural database and began reading about their history. Not their military capabilities or their economic systems, but their art, their music, their literature. She read about humans who had sailed across unknown oceans without knowing what they would find. She read about inventors who had attempted to fly when every rational person knew it was impossible. She read about scientists who had spent decades pursuing theories that their colleagues ridiculed. And she read about the failures, explorers who had died in icy waters, inventors whose flying machines had crashed spectacularly, scientists whose life's work had been proven wrong. But for every failure, there had been someone else willing to try again. Someone who looked at the wreckage and said, "What if we approached it differently?" As dawn broke over Nexus Station, Commander Zara Kethfel came to a realization that would have horrified her just 24 hours earlier. She was beginning to understand why humans were so dangerous to everything the Velter held sacred. It wasn't because they were primitive or violent or unpredictable. It was because they refused to accept that anything was impossible. And despite every instinct in her perfectly engineered mind, she was starting to find that refusal absolutely fascinating. 3 weeks after the initial meeting, Zara found herself doing something that would have been unthinkable a month ago. She was aboard a human research vessel, the Endeavour, heading toward Kepler 442b to witness their preliminary terraforming experiments firsthand. The ship was everything she had expected from human engineering, functional but inelegant, practical but lacking the refined aesthetics of Velter design. The corridors were narrower than necessary, the lighting was too warm, and there were actual windows instead of proper holographic displays. Yet as she walked through the ship, Zara couldn't help but notice things that surprised her. The crew moved with easy efficiency, but they also paused to greet each other, to ask about families, to share brief moments of humor. The working spaces were cluttered with personal items, photographs, small plants, handmade decorations that served no functional purpose. Commander Kethfel, Sarah Chen appeared beside her, wearing practical work clothes instead of her formal uniform. "How are you finding the accommodations?" "Adequate," Zara replied automatically, then caught herself. That wasn't quite honest. "Different from what I'm accustomed to." "I imagine everything feels pretty cramped compared to Velter ships," Sarah said with that easy smile. "We tend to pack a lot of life into small spaces." They walked together toward the observation lounge, where Kepler 442b was visible through the massive viewport. The planet looked exactly as forbidding as Zara remembered from the survey reports, a gray and brown world wrapped in thick clouds, with ice caps that extended almost to the equatorial regions. "It's not much to look at, is it?" Dr. Rodriguez joined them, carrying a tablet covered with scrolling data. "But the preliminary probe results are encouraging." "Define encouraging," Zara said, falling back on her military training. "Your chances of success are still less than 30% by any reasonable calculation." You're probably right, Sarah agreed, but we're not really reasonable people. Lisa Park hurried over, her face flushed with excitement. Sarah, you need to see this. The atmospheric samples from Probe 7 are showing something we didn't expect. She thrust her tablet toward them, and Zara found herself leaning in to examine the data. The chemical analysis showed the usual composition she was familiar with, but there were additional compounds highlighted in green. What are those traces? Zara asked. Organic molecules, Lisa said, barely able to contain her enthusiasm. Complex ones. They're not life signs exactly, but they're precursors, the building blocks. Dr. Rodriguez frowned at his own tablet. That doesn't match our initial surveys. Are we sure these readings are accurate? I've run them 3 times, Lisa confirmed. There's something down there that's already trying to create life. It just needs help. Zara felt that strange tightness in her chest again. That's impossible. Our geological surveys showed no indication of organic chemistry. When were those surveys conducted? Sarah asked. 2 years ago. Standard orbital analysis with deep penetration sensors. From orbit, Sarah mused. We're taking samples from the upper atmosphere and surface. Maybe your people were looking in the wrong place. The implication hit Zara like a physical blow. The Velter survey teams were the best in the galaxy. They were thorough, methodical, comprehensive. The idea that they had missed something significant was almost incomprehensible. Or maybe, Dr. Rodriguez suggested gently, they were looking for the wrong thing. If you're expecting a dead world, you might not notice signs of potential life. Over the following days, Zara watched the human teamwork with a growing sense of disorientation. Nothing they did followed proper protocols. They modified their equipment on the fly based on unexpected readings. They changed their plans when new data suggested better approaches. They argued passionately about interpretations and methods, but somehow these arguments led to better solutions rather than paralysis. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to genuinely enjoy the uncertainty. Don't you find it exhausting? Zara asked Sarah one evening as they stood in the observation lounge, watching the planet's first moon rise over the Terminator line. All this constant adaptation and revision. Sarah considered the question seriously. Sometimes, but you know what I'd find more exhausting, being so sure of everything that I never learned anything new. The Velter approach eliminates variables, Zara explained. We reduce uncertainty through comprehensive analysis before action. And how often does that lead to genuine discoveries? The question again. Zara was beginning to understand that humans had a disturbing habit of asking questions that exposed the limitations of perfectly logical thinking. Discovery is less important than avoiding failure, Zara said, but even as she spoke, she realized how hollow the words sounded. Is it? Sarah turned to face her directly. Zara, can I ask you something personal? The use of her first name created an unexpected intimacy that made Zara's pulse quicken. I suppose. What did you want to be when you were young, before the career aptitude tests and genetic compatibility assessments? What did you dream about? The question unlocked memories that Zara had deliberately suppressed for decades. She remembered being a child, lying on the observation deck of her family's residential module, staring up at the stars and imagining worlds beyond counting. She remembered drawing pictures of creatures that didn't exist and plants that defied biological classification. She remembered the moment her education supervisor had explained that such fantasies were impediments to proper intellectual development. I wanted to explore, she heard herself saying. I wanted to find something that no one had ever seen before. And instead you became a military administrator. It was the optimal career path, given my psychological profile and genetic predispositions. Sarah's expression grew sad. That sounds like a terrible way to choose a life. Before Zara could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Emergency lights cast everything in harsh red, and the ship's intercom crackled to life. All hands to stations. We have an incoming distress signal from the mining platform orbiting Kepler 438c. Repeat, distress signal from mining platform Epsilon 7. Zara's military training took over immediately. What's the nature of the emergency? Captain Martinez's voice came over the comm. Catastrophic system failure. Their life support is failing, and they've got 73 personnel aboard. Estimated time to complete atmospheric loss is 6 hours. How far? Sarah was already moving toward the bridge. 4 hours at maximum burn. Zara felt the familiar weight of command settling on her shoulders. I'll contact Nexus Station for proper rescue protocol. Commander, Captain Martinez's voice carried a strange tone. The nearest Velter rescue ship is 12 hours away, even if we transmitted immediately and they departed within the hour. The math was simple and brutal. By the time proper rescue arrived, everyone on the mining platform would be dead. We have to try, Sarah said without hesitation. Our ship isn't equipped for large-scale rescue operations, Dr. Rodriguez pointed out. We're a research vessel. So we figure it out, Lisa said, already pulling up schematics on her tablet. We modify what we have. Zara watched in fascination as the human crew transformed before her eyes. The casual, friendly atmosphere disappeared, replaced by focused intensity. But unlike Velter emergency protocols, this intensity didn't reduce the humans to mechanical efficiency. Instead, it seemed to amplify their creativity. We can use the terraforming pods, Sarah said, studying the ship's cargo manifest. Strip out the environmental equipment and configure them as emergency shelters. The life support systems aren't designed for human physiology, Captain Martinez warned. Then we modify them? Dr. Rodriguez was already heading for the engineering section. I need 2 hours. We'll have exactly 37 minutes on site before we have to leave to make it back to Nexus Station, the navigation officer reported. Then we work fast, Sarah said simply. Zara found herself swept along as the crew divided into teams, each tackling a different aspect of the impossible problem they had just committed to solving. She tried to contact Nexus Station to report the situation, but the human communications officer gently suggested that they focus on action first and paperwork later. This is madness, Zara muttered as she watched Lisa Park and 2 engineers literally rebuilding atmospheric processors while the ship raced toward disaster at speeds that made the hull groan with stress. Probably, Sarah agreed, working beside her to calibrate emergency beacon transmitters. But it's our kind of madness. You could all die, your ship could be damaged beyond repair. You're risking everything for people you don't even know. Sarah paused in her work and looked at Zara with those imperfect, impossibly warm eyes. What's the alternative? Let them die because helping them might be dangerous. The logical alternative is to wait for proper rescue equipment operated by trained personnel. Logic isn't always the same thing as right, Sarah said quietly. When they reached the mining platform, Zara understood why the humans had been willing to risk everything. The massive structure was venting atmosphere from multiple hull breaches, its solar arrays dark, its emergency beacons flashing in the silent pattern that meant life support failure. Through the observation windows, she could see figures moving inside the habitation modules, people who had perhaps an hour of breathable air remaining. The next 37 minutes were the most intense of Zara's life. The human crew worked with speed and precision that would have impressed any Velter military unit, but they also did something that no Velter unit would have done. They improvised constantly, adapting their makeshift rescue pods to fit through damaged airlock systems, reconfiguring their approach when the first docking attempt failed, finding solutions for problems that their emergency protocols had never anticipated. Lisa Park actually crawled through a damaged conduit to manually activate emergency systems while wearing nothing but a standard pressure suit. Dr. Rodriguez rigged a power transfer system using spare parts from the terraforming equipment. Sarah coordinated the entire operation while simultaneously helping to carry unconscious miners to the rescue pods. And Zara found herself in the middle of it all, using her superior Velter reflexes to help guide rescue pods through debris fields, her analytical abilities to calculate safe evacuation routes, her command training to help organize the terrified survivors. When they finally departed, all 73 mining platform personnel were aboard the Endeavor, packed into improvised shelters and emergency compartments that definitely violated several safety regulations, but were keeping everyone alive. Status report, Sarah called as they headed back toward Nexus Station. All survivors stable, Dr. Rodriguez reported, though we're definitely over capacity for long-term life support. Environmental systems are holding, Lisa added, but we're drawing power at 112% of recommended levels. How long can we maintain this configuration? Sarah asked. Maybe 8 hours if we're lucky, Captain Martinez answered. The return journey was a testament to human endurance and creativity. They redistributed power systems, jury-rigged additional air recycling capacity, and somehow managed to keep everyone fed despite having only enough food supplies for their original crew. But what impressed Zara most was how the rescued miners reacted to their saviors. Instead of formal gratitude or official acknowledgement, there was an immediate integration. The miners shared their technical expertise to help optimize the ship's systems. They told stories that kept morale high during the tense journey. They formed connections with the crew that seemed to transcend species boundaries. How do you do it? Zara asked Sarah as they watched a group that included both humans and 3 different alien species working together to repair a damaged environmental control unit. Do what? Make it look effortless. This level of cooperation and adaptation should take months of careful psychological preparation and compatibility assessment. Sarah smiled, but this time there was something deeper behind it, something that made Zara's heart beat faster. Maybe that's the problem with preparation. Sometimes you have to skip the assessment and just trust people to rise to the occasion. That's incredibly dangerous. Yes, Sarah agreed, moving closer. But look around. How many people would have died today if we'd insisted on playing it safe? As Nexus Station grew larger in the viewports, Zara realized something that would have terrified her just weeks ago. She didn't want this journey to end. She didn't want to return to her ordered, predictable life where every decision was made according to established protocols. For the first time in her adult life, she had experienced what it felt like to do something that mattered more than regulations. She had discovered what humans meant when they talked about the satisfaction of taking risks that led to saving lives. And she was beginning to suspect that Sarah Chen was showing her something far more dangerous than human recklessness. She was showing her what it felt like to be truly alive. The hearing was everything Zara had expected it to be. The Velter High Command had assembled a tribunal of 7 senior officers, each one representing centuries of accumulated wisdom and military tradition. They sat in perfect formation behind a curved desk made of polished synthstone, their silver faces impassive as they reviewed the formal charges against Commander Zara Kethfel. Failure to follow established first contact protocols, unauthorized participation in alien military operations, reckless endangerment of Velter personnel, conduct unbecoming an officer of the Imperial Fleet. Admiral Vexter, the tribunal's senior member, read each charge in the same tone he might have used to recite a grocery list. When he finished, he fixed Zara with a stare that had probably broken hundreds of junior officers over the centuries. Commander Kethfel, how do you respond to these charges? Zara stood at perfect attention in her dress uniform, every insignia precisely aligned according to regulation. 3 months ago, she would have offered a formal defense based on emergency protocols and the preservation of alien life as outlined in Velter humanitarian guidelines. She would have cited specific regulations and precedents that justified her actions. Instead, she heard herself saying, "I regret nothing." A ripple of shock passed through the assembled officers. Admiral Vexter's eyebrows rose fractionally, the Velter equivalent of dropping his jaw in astonishment. "You regret nothing." Admiral Prendel, the tribunal's legal officer, leaned forward. "Commander, you participated in an operation that put both you and the humans at serious risk. You violated direct orders to maintain observational distance from human activities. You have since submitted a recommendation that we approve not just their terraforming proposal, but also a joint research partnership." "Yes, Admiral. And you regret nothing." Zara thought about Sarah Chen, who was probably somewhere in the outer system conducting another impossibly dangerous experiment in the name of discovery. She thought about the 73 miners who were alive because humans refused to accept that some things couldn't be done. She thought about the child in the projection, running through fields of alien flowers, and she realized that the tribunal was asking the wrong question. "Respectfully, Admiral, I regret that it took me 3 years to understand what the humans were trying to show us." Admiral Vexter sat back in his chair. "And what, in your opinion, were they trying to show us?" "That we've forgotten how to grow." The silence that followed was so profound that Zara could hear the subtle hum of the station's atmospheric processors. These were officers who had spent centuries perfecting the art of measured response, and she had just accused their entire civilization of stagnation. "Elaborate," Admiral Prendle said finally. Zara had prepared for this moment, but now that it was here, she found herself speaking from the heart rather than from her notes. When did we stop dreaming? When did we decide that perfection was more important than discovery? The humans aren't trying to show us new technology or military tactics. They're trying to remind us what it feels like to reach for something that might be impossible. And you consider this valuable? Admiral Keswi, the youngest member of the tribunal, spoke for the first time. I consider it essential. Admiral Vexter activated a holographic display that showed the preliminary results from Kepler 442b. The humans had been conducting experiments there for 6 weeks, and the data was unlike anything in the Velter scientific database. These reports suggest that the humans have achieved atmospheric modification rates that exceed our theoretical maximums by a factor of 3, he said. How do you explain this? They're not trying to achieve theoretical maximums, Zara replied. They're trying to solve actual problems. There's a difference. Is there? Admiral, our theoretical maximums are based on optimal conditions with perfect equipment and unlimited resources. The humans are working with whatever they can build, modify, or improvise. They don't have the luxury of waiting for perfect conditions. Admiral Prendle pulled up another report. Their safety margins are unacceptable by any reasonable standard. They've had 17 equipment failures, 8 environmental breaches, and 3 medical emergencies in 6 weeks of operation. And they've solved every single problem without losing personnel or abandoning the project, Zara countered. How many of our operations would have been terminated after the first equipment failure? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Velter military doctrine emphasized careful planning and risk minimization. If an operation encountered significant obstacles, the standard response was to withdraw and develop a more comprehensive approach. Commander, Admiral Vexter said carefully, are you suggesting that Velter operational methods are flawed? This was the moment Zara had been preparing for, the moment when she would either destroy her career or open a door to something unprecedented in Velter history. I'm suggesting that we've optimized ourselves for avoiding failure instead of achieving success, she said, and I think the humans are showing us the difference. Admiral Keswi leaned forward. You realize that accepting your recommendation would require fundamental changes in how we approach interspecies cooperation. We would be acknowledging that another species has capabilities that we lack. We would be acknowledging that another species has capabilities that complement our own, Zara corrected. The humans aren't superior to us, they're different from us, and that difference could make both species stronger. For the next hour, the tribunal questioned Zara about every aspect of her time with the humans. They wanted details about their decision-making processes, their approach to risk assessment, their methods for handling unexpected challenges. But most of all, they wanted to understand how a decorated Velter officer had come to recommend fundamental changes to policies that had guided their civilization for millennia. The human approach to problem-solving is chaotic, Admiral Prendle observed. Chaotic and effective, Zara agreed. Their emotional responses compromise their judgment. Their emotional responses motivate them to attempt solutions that pure logic would reject as impossible. They form personal attachments that create conflicts of interest. Zara paused at this one. Over the past 6 weeks, she had found herself thinking about Sarah Chen far more often than duty required. She had caught herself looking forward to their communication sessions with an anticipation that had nothing to do with official business. Yes, she said finally, they do form personal attachments. And you consider this a strength. Another pause. I consider it complex. Admiral Vexter studied her carefully. Commander, there are reports that you've developed personal feelings for Dr. Sarah Chen. The accusation hit Zara like a physical blow, not because it was false, but because it was true. Somewhere between watching Sarah coordinate an impossible rescue and listening to her talk about dreams and possibilities, Zara had begun to feel things that no amount of Velter emotional regulation training had prepared her for. My personal feelings don't affect my professional assessment, she said. Don't they? No, Admiral. If anything, they've given me insight into why human methods are so effective. When you care about someone, you're willing to try things that you'd never attempt for purely logical reasons. And you see this as an advantage. Zara thought about the rescued miners, about the impossible terraforming project, about Sarah's smile when another crazy scheme actually worked. I see it as the reason humans accomplish things that we dismiss as impossible. The tribunal went into closed session for 2 hours. Zara waited in an adjacent chamber, trying to prepare herself for the end of her military career. The charges against her were serious, and her defense had been based on challenging fundamental assumptions rather than following established procedures. When they recalled her, Admiral Vexter's expression was unreadable. "Commander Kethful, this tribunal has reached a decision regarding the charges against you." Zara stood at attention, ready to accept whatever punishment they deemed appropriate. "The charges are dismissed." The words didn't register immediately. "Admiral. Furthermore, you are hereby assigned as the Velter liaison to the Joint Terraforming Project. Your mission is to observe, learn, and report on human methods with the goal of developing new approaches to interspecies cooperation." Zara felt as though the station's artificial gravity had suddenly failed. "I don't understand." Admiral Keswi smiled, the first genuine expression Zara had seen from any tribunal member. "Commander, you've convinced us that we need to try something different. The question is whether you're prepared for the assignment." "What exactly would be required?" "Extended deployment aboard human vessels, participation in their planning and decision-making processes, formal collaboration with human personnel." Admiral Vexter paused, "including Dr. Sarah Chen." The assignment was everything Zara had hoped for and everything she had feared. Working closely with the humans would give her unprecedented opportunities to understand their methods and contribute to discoveries that could benefit both species. It would also mean spending months or years in close proximity to Sarah, navigating feelings that she barely understood and couldn't control. "I accept the assignment," she said. "Excellent." Admiral Prendel handed her a data tablet containing her new orders. "Your transport to Kepler 442b departs in 6 hours." As the tribunal dismissed her, Admiral Vexter called her aside for a private word. "Commander, I want you to understand something. This assignment isn't just about learning human methods. It's about determining whether our two species can truly work together, or whether the differences are too fundamental to overcome." "I understand, Admiral." "Do you? Because if this experiment fails, it could set back human-Velter relations for decades. If it succeeds—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "If it succeeds, it could change both our civilizations in ways we can't yet imagine." 6 hours later, Zara stood in the docking bay waiting for the transport that would take her back to the humans. She had packed only the essentials, her personal effects, her scientific equipment, and a small holographic projector that contained images from her childhood dreams of exploration and discovery. As the transport arrived, she realized that she was about to embark on the kind of journey that the Velter had stopped taking centuries ago. A journey into unknown territory where the only certainty was uncertainty itself. The transport pilot was human, a cheerful woman named Commander Tors who greeted Zara like an old friend rather than a potentially dangerous alien. "Dr. Chen asked me to give you this," she said, handing Zara a small package wrapped in what looked like hand-decorated paper. Inside was a simple ceramic mug with a hand-painted design that showed a Velter and a human working side by side in a field of impossible flowers. There was also a note written in Sarah's careful handwriting. "Welcome to the team. We've been waiting for you." As the transport departed Nexus Station, Zara held the mug and watched the stars stream past the viewport. For the first time in her adult life, she was heading toward a future that couldn't be predicted or controlled. And for the first time in her adult life, she was genuinely excited about what she might discover. The surface of Kepler 442b was nothing like the projections had suggested. Standing in the environmental suit that the humans had modified for her physiology, Zara stared across a landscape that defied every assumption she had made about terraforming. The sky was the wrong color. Instead of the harsh orange-brown she had expected from the atmospheric analysis, it glowed with soft purples and greens that seemed to shift as she watched. The air itself sparkled with tiny particles that caught the light from the binary stars and scattered it in patterns that looked almost like living aurora. "It's the bacterial modification," Dr. Rodriguez explained, his voice crackling through the communication system. "The atmospheric processors aren't just changing the chemical composition, they're creating microecosystems in the air itself." Sarah appeared beside them, her helmet reflecting the impossible sky. "James, show her the crystalline formations." They walked across terrain that crunched underfoot like snow. But when Zara looked down, she saw that the surface was covered with hexagonal crystal structures that pulsed with their own internal light. Each crystal was no larger than her thumb, but they seemed to be connected by threads of luminescence that created a vast network across the landscape. "What are they?" Zara asked. "We're not entirely sure," Sarah admitted. "They started growing about 2 weeks after we introduced the modified bacteria. They seem to be some kind of hybrid between mineral formation and biological growth." Lisa Park's excited voice came over the comm. "Zara, you have to see this. The crystals aren't just growing randomly, they're forming geometric patterns that correspond to mathematical equations we've never seen before." They climbed a ridge that offered a panoramic view of the experimental zone, and Zara felt her analytical mind struggle to process what she was seeing. The crystal formations weren't random at all. They created spirals and fractals that extended for kilometers, patterns that were simultaneously organic and geometric, chaotic and ordered. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "We think the bacteria are communicating with each other through chemical signals," Dr. Rodriguez said. "But somehow, the crystals are amplifying and modifying those signals, creating a kind of planetary neural network." "You've created a thinking world," Zara realized. "Or we've awakened something that was already here," Sarah said quietly. "The organic precursors you found in our initial atmospheric samples, we think they were the beginning of something like this. We just gave them the tools to express it." They spent the next several hours touring the experimental sites, and each one challenged Zara's understanding of what was possible. The humans hadn't just terraformed a dead world, they had created something entirely new. Plants that were part vegetable, part mineral, part energy converter, weather systems that responded to the emotional states of the research teams. Animal life forms that seemed to exist partly in physical reality and partly in some other dimension entirely. "Your reports never mentioned any of this," Zara said as they returned to the base camp. "Because we didn't understand it ourselves until this week," Sarah replied. "And honestly, we're still not sure we understand it." The base camp was typically human, a collection of prefabricated modules connected by flexible corridors, with equipment and personal items scattered in what looked like organized chaos. But there were new additions that made Zara's breath catch. Growing through and around the human structures were formations that looked like living architecture. Walls that breathed, roofs that filtered light, floors that adjusted their temperature based on the occupants' comfort needs. The boundary between natural and artificial had completely disappeared. "The planet is helping us," Dr. Martinez, the chief engineer, explained as he led them through facilities that rebuilt themselves as they watched. "At first, we thought it was some kind of automated response to our presence, but now we think it's deliberate cooperation." "Cooperation?" Zara stared at a wall that was literally growing a new window because someone had mentioned that the workspace felt too enclosed. "You mean the planet is conscious?" "We mean the planet is responsive," Sarah corrected. "Whether that's the same thing as conscious is a question for philosophers." That evening, Zara found herself alone with Sarah in the observation dome, watching the twin stars set over a landscape that continued to evolve even as they watched. The crystalline formations pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to respond to their presence. "Are you disappointed?" Sarah asked suddenly. "Disappointed. This isn't what we proposed. The terraforming project was supposed to create a standard agricultural world with enhanced mineral extraction capabilities. Instead, we've accidentally created something that we can't explain, can't predict, and definitely can't control." Zara considered the question. By every rational measure, the project was a complete failure. It had produced none of the expected results and created potentially dangerous complications that hadn't been accounted for in any planning document. "No," she said finally, "I'm amazed. Even though we've essentially proved that humans are completely unpredictable and probably dangerous to work with. Zara turned to look at Sarah directly. In the strange light from the alien landscape, the human woman looked otherworldly herself, beautiful in ways that Welter aesthetic theory couldn't categorize. Especially because of that, Zara admitted. Sarah smiled, but there was something hesitant behind it. Zara, can I ask you something personal? The question sent a thrill of anticipation through Zara that she tried to suppress. Of course. What are you going to tell your superiors when you report back? It wasn't what Zara had expected her to ask. I'm going to tell them the truth, that humans have accomplished something that shouldn't be possible and that we need to understand how and why. And personally, what are you going to tell them about working with us? Now they were approaching territory that Zara had been trying not to think about. Over the past weeks, she had found herself integrated into the human team in ways that had nothing to do with her official assignment. She attended their planning meetings and contributed ideas that seemed to complement their chaotic approach to problem solving. She participated in their social activities and discovered that she actually enjoyed the unpredictable conversations that sprang up around their communal meals. Most significantly, she had begun to understand that her feelings for Sarah were becoming impossible to ignore or categorize as purely professional interest. I'm going to tell them that humans have taught me things about myself that I never knew existed, she said carefully. Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching the alien aurora dance across the sky. Zara, there's something I need to tell you about why I requested you specifically for this assignment. Zara's heart rate accelerated. What do you mean? When we submitted the proposal for joint cooperation, I could have requested any Welter liaison. Your superiors gave me a list of qualified officers. Sarah turned to face her. I chose you because of the way you looked at those children in our projections, like you were remembering something you'd lost. The confession hung between them like a challenge. Zara realized that Sarah had been planning this moment for months, orchestrating circumstances that would bring them together in this impossible place to have this conversation. You manipulated the assignment process, Zara said, but there was no accusation in her voice. I created an opportunity, Sarah corrected. What we do with it is up to us. Sarah, I need you to understand something. What I'm feeling, what's happening between us. It's not just professionally complicated, it's personally impossible. Why? Because Welter don't form emotional attachments like this. We don't experience romantic love the way humans do. Our relationships are based on genetic compatibility and psychological complementarity, determined through scientific analysis and social matching algorithms. Sarah moved closer, and Zara could see her own reflection in the human's eyes. And how is that working out for you? The question was gentle, but it exposed the fundamental emptiness that had characterized Zara's entire adult life. She had never formed a deep emotional connection with anyone. She had never experienced the kind of passionate attachment that humans described in their literature and art. She had assumed this was normal, healthy, appropriate for a rational being. Now she was beginning to suspect that it was simply incomplete. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. I don't know how to feel what I'm feeling without losing control of everything I am. Sarah reached out and took Zara's hand, and the simple contact sent electricity through Zara's entire nervous system. What if losing control isn't the worst thing that could happen? It is for my species. Control is everything. Emotional regulation is the foundation of our society. And what has that given you? Another impossible question. What had emotional regulation given the Welter? Peace, certainly. Stability, predictability, the elimination of conflict and suffering through careful management of desire and attachment. But it had also eliminated wonder. It had eliminated the possibility of discoveries that required passionate commitment to impossible goals. It had eliminated the kind of love that motivated people to risk everything for each other. Sarah, if I let myself feel what I'm feeling for you, I don't know who I'll become. Sarah's smile was soft and understanding. What if you become someone better than who you are now? Before Zara could respond, the communication system crackled to life. All personnel to the main lab immediately. We've got a situation with the crystalline formations. They hurried through corridors that seemed to reshape themselves to accommodate their urgency, and arrived at the main laboratory to find the entire team gathered around displays, showing real-time sensor data from across the experimental zone. "What's happening?" Sarah asked. Dr. Rodriguez looked up from a tablet covered with scrolling numbers. "The crystalline network is accelerating. The growth patterns are becoming more complex, and the energy output is increasing exponentially." Lisa Park gestured to a holographic display showing the entire planet. "It's not just our experimental zone anymore. The effect is spreading. We're seeing similar formations appearing on other continents." "How is that possible?" Zara studied the data with growing alarm. "The modified bacteria were only introduced to this region." "The crystals," Dr. Martinez said grimly. "They're transmitting the genetic modifications. The entire planetary ecosystem is adopting our changes and amplifying them." Captain Torres, who had been monitoring communications, looked up with concern. "I'm getting reports from orbital stations around 3 other systems. They're detecting similar energy signatures from planets that were surveyed as lifeless." The implications hit Zara like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just transformed one world. They had triggered a reaction that was spreading across multiple star systems, awakening potential life on worlds that had been dormant for millennia. "We need to contact both our governments immediately," Zara said. "This is beyond anything either species has experience with." "Agreed," Sarah said, but her expression wasn't one of concern. It was one of wondering anticipation. "But first, we need to figure out what we've actually accomplished." "Accomplished?" Zara stared at her. "Sarah, we may have accidentally triggered the awakening of an entire galaxy. We have no idea what the consequences will be." Sarah's smile was the same one Zara had fallen in love with during their first meeting, the expression of someone who saw infinite possibility where others saw only chaos. "I know," Sarah said simply. "Isn't it wonderful?" 6 months later, the emergency session of the Galactic Council convened aboard Unity Station, the massive diplomatic facility that orbited the neutral world of Harmony Prime. Representatives from 47 different species filled the amphitheater, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, harmonics, and translated speech that would have been cacophonous if not for the sophisticated universal translation matrix. Zara stood at the podium designated for joint presentations, wearing a formal uniform that incorporated both Velter insignia and human design elements. Beside her, Sarah wore a diplomatic outfit that somehow managed to look both professional and approachable, a combination that Zara had learned was uniquely human. The past 6 months had transformed both of them in ways that neither had anticipated. The awakening of 17 worlds across 4 star systems had created the largest collaborative research effort in galactic history. Scientists, diplomats, military personnel, and philosophers from dozens of species had converged on Kepler 442b to study what was being called either the greatest discovery or the greatest crisis in recorded history. For Zara, it had been 6 months of learning to navigate feelings that had no precedent in Velter experience. She had discovered that love wasn't the loss of control she had feared. It was the discovery of new forms of strength. Working alongside Sarah had made her a better scientist, a more creative problem solver, and somehow a more complete version of herself. For Sarah, it had been 6 months of learning that human intuition and Velter analysis could create something more powerful than either approach alone. Their partnership had become the model for the larger collaboration, proving that different species could not just work together, but could create entirely new capabilities through their cooperation. "Honored representatives," Zara began, her voice carried throughout the amphitheater by translation systems that rendered her words in dozens of languages simultaneously. 6 months ago, a joint human-Velter terraforming project accidentally triggered what we have come to understand as a galaxy-wide awakening phenomenon. A ripple of various forms of attention passed through the assembly. This was the first formal report on the situation that had dominated galactic politics for half a year. Sarah stepped forward to continue. "What began as an attempt to modify one world's atmosphere has become the spontaneous generation of consciousness on 17 previously lifeless planets. These worlds are not just alive. They are aware, intelligent, and actively seeking to communicate with us." The Zephyrian ambassador, a being that resembled a crystalline tree with prismatic branches, resonated a harmony that translated as skepticism. "You claim that planets themselves have achieved consciousness. This seems to violate fundamental principles of neurobiology. That's exactly why we needed to expand our understanding, Zara replied. The awakened worlds don't use neural networks as we understand them. They use quantum crystalline matrices that process information on a planetary scale. Their thoughts exist in the interaction between geological, atmospheric, and biological systems. Dr. Rodriguez's voice came from the presentation system as holographic displays showed the extraordinary structures that had grown on the awakened worlds. We're not just seeing individual consciousness. These planets are developing what appears to be a collective intelligence network that spans multiple star systems. The Altarian representative, whose species had evolved from hive-mind insects, clicked rapidly in what translated as excitement. Are you suggesting that we are witnessing the birth of a galactic-scale consciousness? We're suggesting that we don't yet understand the full implications of what we've triggered, Sarah admitted. But the early evidence is extraordinary. Lisa Park's research data filled the displays, showing communication patterns between the awakened worlds that exhibited complexity far beyond anything previously documented. The planets are sharing information across interstellar distances instantaneously. They're developing technologies based on principles we haven't discovered yet. And most significantly, they're actively trying to help the species living on and around them. Help how? The question came from Ambassador Korth of the Draconian Empire, whose military-focused species had been among the most concerned about the awakening phenomenon. Zara and Sarah exchanged glances. This was the part of their report that they knew would be most difficult for many species to accept. The awakened worlds are solving problems, Zara explained. They're neutralizing pollution, revering ecological damage, optimizing agricultural systems, and even healing genetic disorders in the species that inhabit them. Without being asked, Sarah added, they seem to have developed what can only be described as a nurturing instinct toward biological life. The Velter representative, Admiral Vexter himself, rose to speak. Dr. Chen, Commander Kethful, are you suggesting that these awakened worlds pose no threat to established civilizations? Zara felt a moment of nervousness. This was her former commander, the officer who had approved her assignment and who would ultimately judge whether the human-Velter cooperation had been successful. Admiral, we're suggesting that they represent an unprecedented opportunity, she replied. The awakened worlds don't want to control or dominate. They want to nurture and enhance. They're offering us capabilities that could solve challenges that have plagued galactic civilization for millennia. But at what cost? Ambassador Korth's question carried the weight of centuries of military caution. What do these planetary consciousnesses want in return? Sarah stepped forward, and Zara could see the passion that had first attracted her lighting up the human woman's eyes. Ambassador, that's the most remarkable thing about this situation. They don't want anything from us. They want things for us. The translation system struggled with the concept, creating a brief cacophony as different species' languages attempted to render the distinction between, from, and for. Elaborate, Admiral Vexter requested. The awakened world seemed to derive satisfaction from the success and happiness of biological life, Zara explained. They're not seeking resources or territory or political power. They're seeking to create conditions where life can flourish. Dr. Martinez's voice joined the presentation as new displays showed the transformed colonies on the awakened worlds. Disease has been virtually eliminated. Agricultural yields have increased by factors of 10 or more. The psychological well-being of colonists has improved dramatically. Crime rates have dropped to near zero, not because of enforcement, but because the environmental conditions seem to naturally encourage cooperation and contentment. You're describing paradise worlds, Ambassador Korth said skeptically. Such conditions cannot be sustainable. That's what we thought, Sarah admitted. We've been monitoring these effects for 6 months, looking for signs of dependence, manipulation, or hidden costs. We haven't found any. The Etherian representative, whose species communicated through shared empathic experiences, projected a wave of curiosity that swept through the assembly. Have you determined why the awakening occurred when it did? Why not centuries or millennia ago? This was the question that Zara and Sarah had been wrestling with for months. The answer they had developed would likely reshape how the galaxy understood the relationship between consciousness and cooperation. We believe the awakening required a catalyst, Zara said carefully. Specifically, it required an example of successful cooperation between fundamentally different forms of consciousness. The human-Velter partnership, Sarah continued, demonstrated that beings with completely different approaches to problem-solving could not just work together, but could create something greater than the sum of their individual capabilities. You're suggesting that your romantic relationship triggered a galactic awakening. Ambassador Korth's tone carried disbelief and disapproval in equal measure. Zara felt her heart rate accelerate. Their personal relationship had become the subject of intense scrutiny and debate among both species. Many Velter saw it as evidence of dangerous emotional instability. Many humans saw it as a romantic fairy tale. Neither perspective captured the reality of what they had experienced. We're suggesting that love, in all its forms, is a creative force, Sarah said firmly. Love between individuals, love between species, love between consciousness and the universe itself. The awakened worlds represent what becomes possible when cooperation is motivated by genuine care rather than mere self-interest. The crystalline collective's representative resonated with harmonics that translated as profound consideration. Dr. Chen, Commander Kethful, you are proposing that consciousness itself seeks relationship, seeks connection with other forms of awareness. We're proposing that consciousness seeks to create conditions where all forms of consciousness can thrive, Zara replied. The awakened worlds don't just want to survive or reproduce. They want to nurture the development of awareness throughout the galaxy. And they chose our species' cooperation as the template for this nurturing approach, Sarah added. Human creativity and emotional engagement, combined with Velter analysis and systematic thinking, created something that the planetary consciousnesses wanted to amplify and spread. Admiral Vexter stood slowly, his expression unreadable. Commander Kethful, Dr. Chen, what are you recommending that this council do about the awakening phenomenon? Zara looked at Sarah, and in that moment of eye contact, she felt the same electric connection that had transformed her understanding of what was possible between different forms of consciousness. We recommend that we stop being afraid of it, Zara said simply. We recommend that we start learning from it, Sarah added. We recommend that we recognize the awakening not as a crisis to be managed, but as an invitation to become better versions of ourselves. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Species after species raised concerns about sovereignty, security, and the implications of planetary-scale consciousness for established forms of government and social organization. But gradually, a consensus began to emerge around a single extraordinary possibility. What if the awakened worlds represented not a threat to galactic civilization, but its next evolutionary step? The final vote was closer than Zara had hoped, but more positive than Sarah had feared. 31 species voted to establish formal diplomatic relations with the awakened worlds, with research partnerships and cultural exchange programs to begin immediately. As the session concluded and representatives began to disperse, Admiral Vexter approached Zara and Sarah privately. Commander Dr. Chen, I want you to know that the Velter High Command has reached a decision regarding your partnership. Zara braced herself for the judgment that would determine whether she still had a future in the Velter fleet. We are establishing a new branch of service dedicated to interspecies cooperation and consciousness research, Admiral Vexter continued. Commander Kethful, you will head this new division. Dr. Chen, the Velter government would be honored if you would accept a permanent position as our primary human advisor. The offer was everything they had hoped for and more than they had dared to expect. Official recognition, unlimited resources for research, and the opportunity to help guide the development of the most significant transformation in galactic history. There is one condition, Admiral Vexter added, and Zara felt her heart sink. Your personal relationship must be documented and studied as part of our research into consciousness cooperation. You would become the primary case study for interspecies emotional bonding. Sarah laughed, the bright, joyous sound that had become Zara's favorite noise in the universe. Admiral, are you asking us to let our love life become a matter of scientific record? I am asking you to let your love life become a model for galactic civilization, Admiral Vexter replied seriously. Zara looked at Sarah, seeing in her eyes the same wonder and possibility that had first captured her attention so many months ago. The human woman who had taught her to dream again, who had shown her that losing control could mean finding something better than perfection. "We accept," they said in unison. Later, as they stood together in the observation lounge watching the stars, Sarah took Zara's hand in the simple gesture that had become their anchor to each other. "So," Sarah said with a smile, "we accidentally triggered the awakening of galactic consciousness, helped establish diplomatic relations with planetary minds, and got our love story written into official government policy. Not bad for a terraforming project." Zara laughed, a sound that would have been impossible for her to make a year ago. "What do we do for an encore?" Sarah's grin was the expression that had taught Zara to believe in impossible things. "I have some ideas." As they watched, one of the awakened worlds in a nearby system pulsed with gentle light, as if acknowledging their presence across the vast distances between stars. The galaxy itself seemed to be celebrating the love that had inadvertently taught it how to love. And for two beings who had learned that the best discoveries came from the courage to reach beyond what seemed possible, that seemed like the perfect beginning for whatever came next.